Hi, my name is Pat McKay, and I'm the manager at the Rochester Hills Museum and Van Hoosen Farm. And today we're sitting at a home at 71 North Livernois. It's one of our historic homes built in 1922. It was the former home of Mr. Oliver Gibbs, who was the supervisor of Avon Township for almost 25 years. And we're here with the hero who saved this building, Don Westphal. And Don is a local businessman who's had long ties here into the Rochester area. And it's our chance to really celebrate. We're celebrating 100 years. This house is 100 years old this year in 2022. And it's been recognized by the Historical Society of Michigan. And we'd like to hear your story about how this building came to be from a boarded up building that was slated for demolition to being restored 25 years ago. And how'd you pull it off?
Well, it's going to be fun to share. I've been a landscape architect for 50 years, had my business in Rochester. Actually, my first offices were in downtown Rochester in a carriage house behind Marty Seibricht's law office. And we're growing and looking for another space. And at that time, this ugly old building was up for sale by the Road Commission. And we were able to purchase it and envision it as a office for my new location.
And it was built as a residential home, but it also served as a church in its history in the late 50s, early 60s, through long contentious legal battles through the church. There was a church on the property. And how was this house used when the church was here?
Well, it's interesting. This was a commune, and there were several families communal living in this space. One of the interesting things when we got the building and started working on demolition and so forth, we couldn't understand what this little item in the corner of the boiler room was. It was cement blocks and about this tall and painted blue on the inside, steps going up, steps going down, and it was a baptismal. And they baptized people in this communal living building in the boiler room.
Wow.
And it had its own well and septic system and all of that. And in the process over the years, we were able to hook up to all the city utilities and so forth.
So the challenge was after it left ownership of the church and was vacant for a long time. At some point, the Road Commission buys it, and the Road Commission was widening Livernois Road. Rochester Hills was a booming town, and it had to go from a 2-lane road suddenly to a 4-lane divided boulevard because we're right here at the intersection of Livernois, just north of Walton Boulevard. Suddenly, the Road Commission had to buy it only because they were encroaching so far on the front of the property.
Right.
And it kind of changed it dramatically then.
Right. And we've got great pictures that, the grade to the right-of-way started right at where the steps used to be at the front porch and went down. And, those pictures are very interesting. And it took some creativity to figure out how we could access the building, do the parking that would be needed for offices in this part, and to go to the city of Rochester Hills and figure out how we could make that happen. Yeah. And Ed Anzac, the planning director at the time, was extremely helpful in making that happen. And we got a use variance, so this property is still zoned as a single-family residential zone with a use variance to allow us to put office uses in here. Initially, those uses were limited to, like architect and attorneys and that kind of limited act. And over the years, we were able to expand the uses. We've got clinical psychologists in the building, use the garage is used now as a salon. And
so it's a great adaptive reuse, and we don't see this a lot in Rochester Hills. We don't have this many houses that it could be eligible, and I think that was the biggest challenge. Really, was that you were trying to do something that hadn't been done before in Rochester Hills, and so there was zoning variances, city council approvals. Neighbors didn't want the building demolished, so they were petitioning the city to get involved. The Road Commission was involved. You mentioned Sue Ann Douglas, who was our county commissioner for Oakland County, 25 years ago, and and all the players that you had to line up to make this work. Ken Snell was our mayor, I think, back then, and so you worked with just about everybody. You said you even knew Earl Borden,
Right.
As part of your, your workings. As you've been involved with the city for a long time.
That was the fun part, getting the Earl Borden Award for historic restoration, having known him when I first moved to Rochester. Another interesting thing was that we had to deal with the neighbors, and one of the first things we did was to meet with them. They were responsible for getting this historic designation within the township and the city of Rochester Hills, feeling that if they did that this building would remain as a residence and not be torn down for some other use,
Sure.
an office building or whatever.
Yeah, another strip mall. And the pictures that I have seen when you got this building, this was a boarded up building that had been broken into and vandalized, and you saw a different vision. When you saw that.
That's the fun thing about being a land planner. You get to do things that long live after you, and that's the beauty of my profession and the things that we've done around town, subdivisions that we've designed in Rochester Hills, and Oakland Township. It's fun to drive down the street and see
even,
stuff you've done.
Yeah, and even today, you said there are projects going on in Rochester Hills that you're still involved in, and you've been in this business for a long time. How long have you been in?
50 years.
50 years.
Yep. I've been. I opened my office in my home 50 years ago. Went to University of Illinois for a grad degree and got my bachelor's degree from Michigan State way back when.
Yeah.
And I developed a specialty designing manufactured home communities and RV resorts as a result of my first house, which was a trailer in a little trailer park in Urbana, Illinois, and ended up being consultant to the industry, and I've received number of awards in that.
So
venue.
when we look at the restoration of this house, you said you helped put wallpaper on every wall. The black walnut trim. Tell us where the black walnut trim that's in this building today, where did it come from?
Well, that was another thing. When we were in the process, they were trying to get additional parking for the Lucky's project. And they cut down 2 huge walnut trees. There's still a big walnut on the back of the property here, but there were 2 other huge ones that they cut down to make additional parking. But they didn't have a permit to cut the trees down, and the loggers actually cut down and ground up all of the small stuff and left these 3 huge logs on the property. And I snagged them with the tractor and pulled them behind the garage, had them sawed up, thinking that they'd be wonderful to use in the building. And they helped us in that we took all of the moldings and the stairway off the first floor and converted them over to matching black walnut moldings on the first floor, and that let us have the old moldings to use developing different rooms and so forth in the building. So,
and you had to, with any adaptive reuse, suddenly you don't need a big kitchen and dining room. You've had to move some walls and some interior walls to accommodate new businesses here.
Trying to make as many office spaces as we could that would be rentable, and so it was a pretty interesting process. This was once a big long living room here with a fireplace at the end. And the other side, which is a beautiful office with wonderful windows, was then the dining room, which we made smaller and created a secretarial space next to it. And then we still have a little bit of a kitchen left over here. And what was the pantry on the first floor ended up being accessible bathroom.
We had a huge challenge with handicapped accessibility. This is up like on a ridge a little bit. And in fact, the original name was called Chestnut Ridge. That's what they called this house before it was changed to the Avon Prairie House. But handicapped accessibility was a huge challenge for you too.
it being an office building, that was one of the challenges with the building department, was determining what we could do to this building as it related to existing codes versus what the International Building Code had to say about historic restorations. We were challenged in the beginning with, you're going to have to put an elevator in this building. Well, putting an elevator in this building would have blown the financial feasibility right out the window. And we were able to look at the International Building Code, which said that if the floors above and below an accessible floor were less than 3,000 square feet, then we could do without an elevator. And that saved the day on that issue. And when we presented that to the city, we were able to get it.
It sounds like every one of those situations was insurmountable, and then you would climb over that one, and there's another one kind of waiting. And you said your own sweat equity is in this building. You have wallpapered yourself, and then have you used many local contractors, or what did you have to contract out?
Well, everything that we've done here was, except for demolition work and minor things like painting and the like. Local plumbers, local heating and air conditioning people. Actually, it's interesting. The original well for this building is now used for irrigation. So we have a sprinkler system outside that uses the original well. And there's an interesting story about that. When this was a communal building, the well went dry, and they brought in a well driller, and he drilled and finally, after several days, said, "Hey, we just can't get a well here." And the congregation said, "Well, leave it to us for one more day. We're going to pray over that well." And they prayed over the well, and the next day he hit water. so I mean, there's this wonderful little stories about this building.
When a building's 100 years old, there's a lot of stories, aren't there?
There certainly are.
Wow, that's a
when we occupied when we got the building the first time, there was only one occupant in it, and that was a bat up in the attic, and that was the one occupant.
Well, there were some other stories. You had to look for some building material, and I heard that there was a building in the Upper Peninsula. There was a building up in the Thumb. Were there other buildings scavenged that you heard of that pieces were brought here?
Okay, so this building today has the original roof that's 100 years old, asbestos cement shingles, and there were several buildings in Rochester that were the same. The Houghton's Power Center down there beside the elevator had the same roof on it, and a couple of houses in the area. And we needed shingles to help replace ones that were broken and so forth. And then my partner, Sam Wardlaw, was traveling in the Thumb and saw a house that was being re-roofed, and we got some shingles from that. And so it's kind of like trying to find out, and then finding someone, a roofing company that could deal with those issues was an interesting aspect of it all. So,
you mentioned your financing of this. You were fortunate to have the Bank of Rochester and Pat Bakken, who's a longtime Rochester Hills resident. I think we both would claim her as friends. She was instrumental in helping you and working with Oakland County and the Small Business Administration and helping you pull the financing together.
Yeah, it's interesting. My first mortgage out in Oakland Township was through the old Bank of Rochester, and Paul Windisch, who was a Lions Club friend of mine, and I became acquainted with Pat, and as she moved from one bank to another, kept that relationship going. And when we bought this, fortunately at the time I was capable of buying the property from the county, and she agreed to give us construction loans. And as normal projects go, and historic restorations in particular, all of these end up costing more than, and so we did things to keep our budget going. But at the end of the day, We couldn't make the 80% necessary down payment versus loans to make it happen, and Pat was instrumental in getting us connected with the Oakland small business group, and we ended up with a small business loan, and the two loans together allowed us to make it happen. And a little sweat on my brow
Yeah, how bad?
over not being able
How
to knowing where it would happen. But as time goes by, real estate values increased to the point where we were able to. I was able to buy out my partners, and to get a mortgage and get the small business loan released and paid off, and a mortgage on the building. And after 20 years, became a good investment.
Yeah.
But time wounds all heals.
Sure. But anybody who's a homeowner understands the systems of a house, your electrical system, your heating, ventilating, air conditioning system, your plumbing system. It's all new here. You had to deal with every one of those systems in a house that had been abandoned for many, many years. So you started from scratch with every system in the house.
This house was originally steam heat, had radiators in all the bedrooms in the hall. We got one radiator left out there that I didn't trash, and changed it over to hot air. So now this building has a furnace in the attic that takes care of the second floor, and then there's a furnace in the basement which takes care of the basement area and this first floor. Interestingly enough, the original basement had a very high ceiling in it, and now it has 8-foot suspended ceilings in it, which is unusual.
Sure.
Usually basements,
small, cramped, dark spaces,
and there were windows in there. And one other interesting thing was that there was a room off to the northeast corner of the building. Had this huge cement block wall with a door opening in it, and looked in there, and I saw this little downspout coming in there, and that was a cistern, and so originally this had a well that serviced your drinking
cistern
water.
Catches the water off the roof.
Took the water off the roof
into a tank. You could use that water.
And you could use that water for laundry and everything but drinking.
Yes.
And and interestingly enough, it took a couple laborers a whole day to beat that wall out of there because it was reinforced cement blocks and so forth. But that's a great office space down in the lower level, and it had a great entrance and still has that, which we kept. So the basement space in the building has its own exterior entrance as well as entrance off the main hall here.
Yeah, the exterior of the house, I mean, the porch is still architecturally beautiful with the columns there. The windows, have you had to change the windows, or are they?
Well, that's another interesting story. I thought, these old windows are unique and so forth. Maybe we ought to think about getting more energy efficient windows in there. And so I had my friends from Dillman and Upton come out, and we took one window out and determined that the way these windows were built, this building is kind of ceramic blocks, not cement blocks, but ceramic blocks. And they would block up to where a building was. They'd set the window in and then keep blocking up, and they'd drive nails into the casing around the window that were in mortar joints. And after we took one window out, we figured that if we took all the windows out, this building could collapse on itself. So we kept the window, and there were a couple of older windows. I had a glass window restoration person come in, and he determined that this building was built about to change the time when they went over from one method of doing glass to another. And some of these windows in the building have these little eyelets in them and so forth that are really imperfections that are really unique and wonderful to keep. And so, we took all of the weights out and had them re-insulate all of the windows, but still the glass in this building is original.
So you met most of the historic preservation standards. I mean, you're always trying to preserve what you have already.
Right.
So it's a beautiful building, and it's called a Prairie style house.
Right.
And it's a little taller than most Prairie style houses. Most of them sit a little bit lower, but
Right.
it has some Frank Lloyd Wright, inclinations towards that style.
It's called a four-square building, and like upstairs there are four bedrooms off a hall, and I named it the Avon Prairie House, and that was my part of a way to give it a name and help sell our restoration. We brought Avon in because we figured that would be near and dear to the heart of some of the people who were in control at that time. And this was originally, the plaque says the Gibbs House. It was all known as the White House for a period of time too. So it's had a number of names, sure. But the Avon Prairie House was a name we gave it to signify the architecture style and its original origins as Avon Township.
Yeah, it's really unique. And what's unique about the setting, not only the design, but you have a carriage house kind of out back that you've also adaptively used, and you have a business out there.
Yeah, that was a garage. And a two-car garage, and we just absolutely needed whatever space we could get, and it ended up being a wonderful, cute little building. And
you have a tenant out there right now?
Oh yeah, it's Carriage House Salon, and it's been through two owners, and one of our original partners had a office in that building. And so it's been through a number of iterations to get it where it is today, too.
Yeah. It really sounds like a fireproof building when you talk about the ceramic blocks, the asbestos shingles on the roof. 1922. 1922 were the Roaring 20s, and this was an affluent time period. Meadowbrook Hall is being built in the 20s. Van Hoosen farmhouse is being renovated and added on to in the 1920s, and there was some serious money being spent. And Rochester is at a point where we have the interurban line that's connecting us to Detroit, so you could live here, and these are country houses living outside of the city of Detroit, and it really captures an amazing time period in Rochester Hills history.
It brings up another story. You talked about a fireproof kind of building. Well, we went through a number of iterations and quite a bit of expense trying to determine whether we would have to sprinkle this building to make it fireproof and so forth. And ended up, after a significant struggle and a little bit of time with consultants, was able to get the city to allow us not to put a sprinkler system in the building. It's designed to be able to, block off different portions of the building with fireproof doors and all of that. But that held us up for a month and a half or 2 months while they tried to determine what we were going to do there. Yeah. We couldn't put enough gallons per minute of water through a sprinkler system because we had a residential water meter to the building. So yes, all these little things that.
And as we look at it now, it's been, we mentioned 25 years ago, roughly, that you finished this?
It's 20. It's 20
okay.
years. Yeah.
So when you reflect back on it, was it a remarkable project? Do you look back on it fondly? Would you never do it again? What would be your advice when you see somebody else trying to renovate a house?
Just be prepared to spend more money than you ever thought you'd spend on it. Yeah. But the rewards are great. I mean, there's nothing different what we did with this building than what we do when we do our land planning business. We try to build our projects out of the land. We try to preserve what's there. We don't go in and rape and pillage a piece of property to make it a residential subdivision or a RV resort or a manufactured home community. We try to preserve what's there, and that goes to the background of landscape architecture, which is fun stuff.
Sure. When you started your project, or your business here in the Rochester area, Rochester and Avon Township was a rural community, and you have seen this town grow up. Your business and your whole profession has grown up with the city of Rochester Hills.
It's fun. I've got a couple of friends. One has passed away since, whose picture is on the front of the the Rochester book that just came out, Jim Williams, and they remember overnighting with the nephew of O.P. Gibbs in this building. So, you know, there's so much history. That's great fun.
You know, and our mayor, we use a slogan frequently in our town that this is a great town to live, work, and raise your family. And you've done all those. You've lived here, you've worked here, and you've raised your family over 50 years here in Rochester Hills.
Great stuff.
Great stuff.
And you know, and at the end of your career, to be able to look back on some of these wonderful little things that have your thumb on is a great thing.
Yeah, this is a project that's like many that you probably work on that's going to long outlive you. It's really,
I think the roof will outlive me.
You know, and in front of us we have lots of papers. The museum has a file on many addresses, and it's amazing looking at this. You know, the many heroes really. John DeZerman was part of the Historic Districts Commission. Lois Golden, Ken Snell, Ed Anzac you've mentioned. Pat Goodwin was a former planning department director, and there have been lots of hands because you were doing something that the city hadn't done before either. The way we were dealing with zoning, you have neighbors right tight to you here, and you were able to really pull it together. So it's really a testament to, you know, local government, county government, everybody kind of working together, and at the end of the day, we have a product to be proud of.
Yeah, and Mayor Somerville was very, very helpful through this process.
You've worked with just about every mayor now. You've mentioned from Earl Borden all the way up. So it sounds like you've worked with every single mayor in Rochester Hills.
Right, and you know, and sometimes I had to have her help me intervene, you know, to make a couple of things happen, and so I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, and that's the way it does work. You know, really, you talk to people, and it sounds like it's interesting to hear how you've met with your neighbors and to try and make this fit in, because otherwise they would have had a commercial property here. You know, they would have backed up to commercial property. You can see why they wouldn't want to do that. That either. So, well, we appreciate this. These files that we have at the museum are always available to the public, and we've just talked about it. This file will now get digitized. I will share it with you, so you can have that and always reflect back on this property. We have some great pictures of the Gibbs, and Mr. Gibbs not only lived here and was a Avon Township supervisor, he was the county executive for Oakland County, and he ran businesses in downtown Rochester. He was a restaurant owner, and
one of the newspaper articles, he got hit by a car going across Main Street, you know, in the 20s.
There's lots of stories about these houses, You know, and the other thing, there's a Christian Science church in downtown Rochester on the corner of Woodward and Rochester Road, and they were founding members of that church there, and very involved in the Masonic Lodge. His wife was involved in the Order of the Eastern Star, and you just see their involvement they were just embedded in this community and really made that contribution, both as a business owner and as an elected official. And those are the kinds of people we like talking about in our community. Those are the ones that really enrich it and make this a great town to live in.
Great, and I appreciate you being here.
You're welcome. We hope that you'll continue on. The house, I know at some point we'll have other tenants. It will outlive all of us here, but it'll always be here because Don Westphal saved it from the wrecking ball. And we really appreciate your time and your commitment to our community. Thanks for doing that.
All right, appreciate it.